Hello and welcome to today's SEI webcast, an introduction to the MLOps tool evaluation rubric. My name is Shane McGraw, an outreach team lead here at the Software Engineering Institute, and I'd like to thank you for attending. We want to make our webcast today as interactive as possible, so you can submit questions in the YouTube chat area now, and we will get to as many as we can. We did receive a number of questions prior to today's webcast, and we will work in some of those questions as well. Our presenters also have a few polling questions that they will launch on Slido. Those links will appear as a QR code in the video window, and also we will add them into the YouTube chat as a link. And we'd appreciate your participation there. Now I'd like to introduce our featured speakers for today. Violet Torrey is an associate software developer in our AI division, where she leads AI engineering efforts focused on AI design and adoption, test and evaluation strategies, and ML ops pipelines. A graduate of Cornell University with a degree in computer science, she applies strong technical expertise across AI engineering projects. Emily Newman is an associate machine learning engineer in the SEI's AI division, working on applying assured AI to autonomous systems. Emily obtained her bachelor's in computer science and robotics from Carnegie Mellon University. Prior to working at the SEI, she spent 5 years at NASA JPL as a software systems engineer and Mars rover operator. Welcome, Violet and Emily. And Emily, I'm going to turn it over to you now. All yours.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in today, and welcome to an introduction to the MLOps tool evaluation rubric. This is just our copyright slide, and then we have our agenda. So we'll start with a little bit of an introduction just to the SEI. You may or may not know what it is, so we'll just give a quick overview and the motivation for this project, a process overview, our MLOps tool evaluation content, and actually making use of the rubric we developed, some lessons learned that we learned from making use of our own rubric, and some scenarios, and then we'll have a little Q&A session at the very end. And also throughout, we will have some polling questions on Slido, so I'll introduce those when they crop up, but keep an eye out for those, and perhaps keep your phones and phone cameras ready. Okay, so just to preface all of this, the Software Engineering Institute is a federally funded research and development center in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We are researching complex software engineering, cybersecurity, and AI engineering problems, creating and testing innovative technologies, and transitioning maturing solutions into practice. So this is a little statistic from our division's website, the Artificial Intelligence Division, and as many as 85% of current AI deployments fail, which are largely to the difficulty of replicating, verifying, and validating rapidly developed and deployed AI systems. So as you can see, the development of the process and procedures of AI engineering is currently a big problem that everyone is trying to address. And so that is one of the main tenets that our division, the AI division at SEI, looks into. So for this specific project, this MLOps tool evaluation rubric, in the AI division, we collaborate often with government customers to advance the practice of AI engineering, to solve some of those problems mentioned earlier, and facilitate the adoption of emergent AI technologies. So this tool rubric was designed to standardize and enable MLOps acquisitions and help teams to build and to manage deployed AI systems at scale. And just to preface all of this, if you haven't heard of the term MLOps, kind of think, I like to phrase it as DevOps, but for machine learning. And not as opposed to machine learning for DevOps. But it's a set of practices that are at the intersection of machine learning, DevOps, and data engineering. So it's kind of the support structures necessary to enable development of machine learning models and algorithms and systems. And that the definition there is pulled from Wikipedia. So here's our first poll question, and Violet will be keeping an eye on the poll. So please let me know what ends up happening. But we're just curious, for those of you tuning in, what your primary role is in your organization, or whatever the case may be. So we have kind of our options here are AI ML engineer or developer, data scientist, project or program manager, acquisition or procurement professional, or something else. And I guess if you represent yourself, then choose which one you feel you are best aligned with. And we'll wait a few minutes, a few seconds for some responses to come in. Cool. I think in the meantime, yeah, I think that was most of the introduction I could give for this project.
Okay, yeah, we're starting to see some of the votes come in. I'll give people maybe like 30 more seconds, and then really part of why we're asking this is to kind of get a gauge on what types of topics people might be interested in or how this applies to their current primary role. So once we have the results, we can talk about that for a moment, and then Emily will take it away.
Yeah. And it does seem like people might be saying things in the chat. So I don't know, Shane, you're keeping an eye on
great.
it. If you're saying anything interesting.
Yeah, one issue they were running into is Slido was blocked for a couple DoD orgs. So some of those folks couldn't get to that landing spot. So feel free to type in to the chat those folks if you're blocked, and I'll get it to Emily and Violet.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I'll stop the poll for now. Hopefully people had the chance to get their votes in. But from the looks of it, we had about 8% of attendees who are either AI, ML engineers or developers. 25% are data scientists, so pretty good showing of people with a data science background. We have a data operations section, which Emily's going to talk about shortly, so that should be definitely relevant to your work. 17% project or program manager, and then 50% said other. So that is probably part of why we have so many answers in the chat. But so I think what Emily's about to go over will definitely be relevant to a lot of different roles here. And there are different sections that we'll be talking about, both like with tool capability and support capability, that should be relevant to different participants who are here today.
Yeah. It sounds like they have a mix of all types, which is great. Violet, I think you can proceed to the next slide. So this is just a quick overview of where we think this rubric can be useful and where it can fit into the acquisition process. So first you take your, we're basically developing this rubric to score and assess ML tools based on key criteria and metrics essential for successful AI and data initiatives. So you start with your AI or data initiative. From there, you would identify your project and program needs and kind of define what you need. And then the acquisitions team would take a look, or whoever is acting out the role of the acquisitions team could take a look at those program needs and then also use our rubric and customize it to assess the criteria, determine the assessment criteria, and then actually assess vendors to see what they provide and what is needed. Vendor tools can be scored based on their coverage of the project needs. So kind of loops back around to the acquisitions team, which evaluates these vendors' potential capabilities. And then at the end, the acquisitions team can make an informed purchase and purchase effective tools to support the AI data initiative. We're kind of thinking this rubric can play a role in streamlining that process and making sure that the initiatives are receiving the vendor capabilities that they need and that they need for success. Here's another poll question. So I guess if the polling is not working for you, you can feel free to put this in YouTube chat as well. And then anything else that is not already covered by these options. So our options here are how to identify and prioritize ML ops tooling capabilities, how to customize and apply the ML ops tool evaluation rubric, lessons learned from a real world implementation, on all of the above, or something else that isn't already covered here. And I think we will end up going over all of these things, but it is interesting to know what people are most want to hear about, and so we can kind of tailor specific responses to that as well. So I'm actually flipping over to the results as well, Violet. It does look like a lot of people are interested in all of the above.
Okay, maybe we'll give it about 20 more seconds and then we can move on and close the poll.
Yeah, and thanks to our observers for participating in the poll. I think it's always interesting to see what people like have some flavor of input on the presentation and what you guys want to hear. So that's awesome.
Okay, yeah, closed out the poll. It looks like a lot of people are interested in all of the topics. And then out of the three options, a lot of people voted for how to customize and apply the MLOps tool evaluation rubric, which is great to know. We're going to talk about that at length. Maybe given kind of the crowd, a lot of people are familiar with MLOps sort of capabilities in general, but we can definitely dig into specifics of the rubric during this presentation.
All right. So let's go over the actual content of this rubric that we've developed. We kind of structured it into these basically these two overarching sections which have like some major subsections underneath them. So I think we're going to go through some of the key criteria and metrics used to score and assess like overall vendor solutions. And basically we call this our tool capabilities. So the data operations section covers like basically all of the capabilities needed to actually leverage data in a machine learning project. These main categories we have here are exploring data, which covers common attributes of tools for exploratory data analysis, also known as EDA. Acquiring data, which makes sure you have options available for leveraging local and open source data or any other data sources you can find. Storing and managing data considers different options for keeping track of your data. Pre-processing data is about preparing the data for use. Sampling data covers options for building out training, testing, and validation data sets, very important. And then versioning data looks at how data is tracked and managed over time. And so all of these categories kind of make up the data operations section. The next section we have is model operations, which kind of covers the core functionality needed to produce the models. This is including using off-the-shelf models or architectures. So we have acquiring models, which is using that, training and testing models on our data sets, which would be like developing models. And then finally, securely storing and effectively versioning these models as the project scales. So that would be storing and managing models. All right. Our next major section here is experiment tracking. So for an experiment is kind of considered like teams testing out different combinations of hyperparameters, data sets, other configurations, different types of model runs. And so experiment tracking looks at how tools support designing, running, and storing and analyzing experiments. Okay, so we have our fourth section, which is model deployment and monitoring. So once we have the system up and running, we need capability to ensure that models are up to date, continually updated, and new models are trained and deployed. And so like data scientists, researchers can actually access these models and like actual users can use them for whatever needs they have. So continuous model deployment looks at the functionality to ensure seamless model deployment. And then monitoring models covers tools for monitoring models in prediction to identify drift and trigger retraining. So basically just keeping an eye on things as the models are in use during deployment. Okay, so that big section is a tool capability section. It kind of covers the technical aspect of a tool and what capabilities you need. The other big section we have is support capabilities. So this is kind of all of the realities of actually using a tool. So this first major section here is the user experience section. Very important consideration when assessing tools, as the design and usability of a tool can significantly impact its adoption and use. And even most advanced features may be ineffective if the interface is unintuitive or poorly designed for user workflows. So we have like the three main sections here are user involvement, user support, and user interface. So we're kind of thinking like, is the user base of this tool actively interacting with it? Do they interact with the company? Like, are forums available? User support is kind of like, how does the vendor support the user in actually making use of the tool? And then the user interface is kind of a very qualitative judgment of how is it easy to use, is it intuitive, can it actually be used by the people who need it? So that's pretty important. Our next section is security and compliance, which kind of is the like talks about the realities of using these tools, because I think it is very important, especially for like government customers. They have specific needs and specific things that they need to implement in order to make the tool compliant with different regulations. And so we have these two main subcategories, which are access controls, like basically controlling who can access the data within the tool, security related, and then regulatory standards, basically like does it actually align with any applicable standards that may be needed. And then this last section here is acquisition and deployment. So this covers things like the cost of the system, the cost of the tool, the credibility and the operational readiness, like how long has the tool been around? Does it have some sort of heritage, or like basically has it been used by other similar organizations, all of that good stuff. And then integration, like how well does it integrate into the broader ML pipeline? Does it take a modular approach? Does it have hooks for integration with continuous deployment type CI/CD type of tools? So all of these things are looked at as a whole and to see if the tool matches the needs of the project. And the last slide is all together. These 7 major sections that are split into 2 different groups make up the entirety of the rubric and how we broke everything down. Okay, so our next poll question is, at what stage is your organization in deploying AI and ML systems? And so we're thinking like where are you in the process of product development, basically? You have the exploratory proof of concept, so you're basically just trying things out. The pilots are limited deployment, being like, okay, like you have like a kind of a pipeline, but I don't know, perhaps it's a very limited user base. And then there's like generally like research use, like I don't know, I've seen in research pipelines can be kind of all over the place. So that's kind of a catch-all. Full production systems in use. So like you have like a company that's actually serving models to people, and then not yet started is one of the options as well. And I think as always, you can drop things into the YouTube chat to see what's going on there.
While we vote, can we work in a audience question that came in prior to the webcast?
Sure.
Okay, so we had a question that came in from Grace ahead of the event. What types of MLOps tools are commonly used in enterprises, and what are the use of those tools? Can one of you address that while we're voting?
Yeah. Do you want me to start? I can.
Yeah, you can start, and I'll add if I have more.
Yeah, I think we've seen things like in the different categories that we outlined. Like, for example, one tool that we looked a lot at that we'll probably talk about later in this webinar is Databricks, and like data operations kind of tools and management. There's also kind of like model operations and management. It's basically these infrastructures that like they like enable you to have lots of different models and like track your progress over time. And then like or like manage data sources and that sort of thing. And we have seen a lot of these in use through like different industry and government sources. So I don't know if you want to expand on that. I think you've seen it more.
Yeah, that aligns with my perspective too. I've seen a number of different organizations who either are currently using or interested in using tools to help them basically with data and model versioning, since as their product kind of matures, they might end up with a lot of different models or periodically be retraining, and that can be hard for an individual to kind of track. There's also definitely a need for tools to help you kind of like with monitoring your model after it's been deployed. That's another place where as projects scale up, it can be a little bit challenging. So those were a couple areas where we've seen stuff.
Great, thanks for covering that. We can address the poll and take it from there. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know, Emily, can you see the poll results right now, or?
Yeah, it seems like a majority of results are research use, like 43% research use, and then a kind of even distribution of the rest of the options. So that's pretty interesting and kind of makes a lot of sense. I feel like a lot of research going on around ML right now, but I feel like even research use could benefit a lot from having a bit of structure, speaking from experience. And I think that some of these tools are actually quite useful for like research projects, like even the fast pace or low personnel amount of time, low time projects as well. So yeah, and then All right, so thanks everybody for replying. I think at this point, I will turn it over to Violet to continue to show us how to use the rubric and also some examples of some different scenarios you might use it for.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, I'm gonna start off with a couple examples of ways that you can use the rubric and what it actually looks like. After the webcast, we will be sharing an Excel spreadsheet version of this. Maybe it'll be a couple days after this, but very shortly it will be accessible to people who attended the talk who are interested in actually using this rubric. So there are a couple of different ways that we recommend using the rubric. So the first is that it's really important to actually customize the rubric for your specific use case. Emily walked through all of our tool and support capabilities, and they're definitely a great starting point for starting to think about what kinds of MLOps tools might be useful to you and starting to think about how you might want to scope which tools you actually end up acquiring and using. But we definitely recommend taking a close look through the rubric and thinking about if there are any specific kinds of needs that you have for the tool. So as an example, let's say you're on a project where you're looking for an EDA tool, but already you have some people making use of Jupyter Notebooks as an example. You might want to make sure that the tools that you acquire for EDA are compatible with Jupyter Notebooks, where you might have the ability to import and export and so forth. So these kinds of specific details are great to add in. We would recommend just adding a new line to the spreadsheet under whichever kind of primary question is about that topic. And then you also can weigh your questions in different ways. So you could change all of the weights in the spreadsheet. To start, we have them all just set to 1, but it might be a good idea to sit down and think about either through discussions with your AI or ML development team or with acquisitions team, think about how you want to weigh things and which functionality is the most essential to your project. We have a couple of different ways that we automatically kind of weigh and calculate total scores for you. So we have a view for each page within the slide or set of Excel spreadsheets that totals the score. And then we also have an overview page that can show you, like for all of these categories, data operations, model operations, and so on, how did that specific tool score? So if there are specific things you want to weigh highly, this is definitely an easy way to do that and make sure that your evaluation is tackling whichever specific capabilities are really essential to your project or your program. Another thing that we recommend doing is having multiple evaluators. So basically what this looks like in practice, you can go about doing evaluations in a number of ways. So with the rubric, we're thinking primarily about looking through documentation associated with a tool and starting to untangle, well, what are the specific capabilities provided by this tool? How might I make a decision between tool A and tool B? But so in that case, there are instances where you find something that kind of falls on the cusp of you're not sure if it's a yes or a no to it offering that capability. So for situations like that, it's super helpful to have a couple different evaluators. And then what you can do is kind of look side by side at how you filled out the rubric. If you're documenting justification and a link, it's really easy to go back into the document and pinpoint, here's the line or section that made me answer this question in the way that I did. And so if you kind of work through every piece of the rubric and start untangling areas where people have different perspectives, you can really align on a solid kind of evaluation of the tool. So that's another piece that we really recommend doing. I know whenever Emily and I, for example, have looked at tools and evaluated them, it was really helpful to have discussions about different pieces of it, especially when maybe the documentation is a little vague, or maybe we even want to iterate on a question and make it more specific as far as what we would consider generating tables for EDA, as an example. So then another piece, we've been working on a prototype that can kind of help with particularly this multi-evaluator piece, but also with customization potentially. So two of our colleagues, Brian McKenna and Nick Winsky, really focused on building out an interactive UI for evaluation. So I'll play this video. It's narrated by Brian. Hopefully everyone can hear it. Let me know if anyone has any issues. Okay, not sure if the audio is working. Let me see. Oh, share sound. Okay, hopefully, let me know if let me know if this works now.
Of the machine learning take you on a quick tour of the Machine Learning Software Assessment Tool, or MALSAT. This is a prototype, so not all functionality is available yet, and it is a bit of a work in progress. This is intended to show what may be possible with this tool. First, we start on the main screen. It lists the available assessments and allows you to create a new one. One is already selected here. Below this are the details about the assessment, and it's where you may be able to customize the rubric used. Tapping this button takes you to a customization screen where you can include and exclude considerations or add items important for your organization. Back on the main screen, you can see the individual tool evaluations done for the assessment. They are scored based on their tool capabilities, the main thing you want to use the tool for, like model operations, data exploration, and so on, and support capabilities, things like security, user experience, and help. The chart to the right shows how the evaluated tools compare on those factors. You can select one for more information on its scoring. Tapping the Detailed Comparison button sends you to a screen that provides more details on each of the tools and how they compare across the different categories, all the way down to the capability level. You can add new evaluations for each tool, and they will be inserted to the list. Once opened, you must answer first some required questions that are typically essential to even consider the tool for use. Once these are complete, you'll move on to the evaluation where you can walk each capability, indicate whether the tool supports it, and provide web links and notes to justify your decision on that tool and that capability. Once finished, you can mark the evaluation as complete.
Okay, so yeah, this is something our team put together based on kind of our experiences of using the Excel spreadsheet version of this rubric, and it's something that we hope to be able to continue working on. I'll also add that the actual scores in this presentation are just mock scores. That's not really how we scored Databricks versus MLflow, et cetera. But just to give you a sense of how you might do those comparisons and how you can visualize them so that you can actually have actionable kinds of results of your evaluation.
Take you on a quick tour.
Okay, so now we have another poll question. This question is asking about what sort of the biggest barrier is right now within your organization to selecting those MLOps tools. So some examples that we've seen with groups that we've worked with. One is that there are just too many options and it's hard to compare. I would say, especially given the landscape of all these different startups, it can be kind of tricky to figure out, well, what are actually the differences between tool A and tool B, and what would be the value add of selecting one over the other. Another challenge can be a lack of internal expertise. So I think there can be differences between when you're building out a proof of concept for a model versus when you're actually deploying that model and thinking about how you keep the model up to date and high accuracy over time. So that can also be a gap, is just kind of lack of familiarity with MLOps pipelines or what kinds of tools might go into those. Another issue can be a lack of a clear evaluation process or a rubric. We found, especially when organizations are trying to acquire tools kind of on an enterprise level, it's hard for them to figure out how to make those decisions without some form of guidance or a standardized structure for making those evaluations. And then there can also be other kinds of just procurement and acquisition challenges in general. So, for example, for a lot of our government customers, there might be concerns about security or some other aspect that makes this process take more time and can kind of complicate it. So yeah, interested to see what people have experienced so far. I'll take a peek at the poll. It looks like, well, okay, so there's quite a few people, it looks like, probably posting something in the chat. There's also, right now, lack of internal expertise and no clear evaluation process or rubric are two of our leading areas, but it looks like people are experiencing a lot of different kinds of barriers with this. So I guess, Emily, do you want to keep this open, or do you think probably good to close it out?
Yeah, I think I'll leave it open for a little bit while you move on to the next slide. But yeah, I think we have it looks like it's about even across the board. So
okay.
Yeah, everyone's having all sorts of challenges with this.
Okay. Okay, cool. And then I guess also, Shane, not to put you on the spot, but if we have any like audience questions, I think we can take a moment here before I get into lessons learned for Emily and I to answer.
We have one from Gabby Violet asked, and she had wrote earlier, I have no background in ML ops, but I am curious as to why so many data science projects don't make it to production. What should beginners do to deepen understanding of ML ops?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we kind of alluded to this on our earlier slide, but there are a lot of different reasons why these projects fail, and a lot do. I think when it comes to data science projects, having a rigorous exploratory data analysis process and making sure you're using data that really models the problem you're trying to solve is very important. So that's one obstacle there. And then with AI systems in general, as we have discussed throughout, there can be some challenges in actually deploying systems at scale. So I think that's kind of where an ML ops understanding starts to become really important. I've done a variety of things to learn about ML ops throughout my career so far, both through working on projects directly where we've been implementing and helping teams acquire ML ops tools. But I also took a course, maybe it was a Coursera kind of course that was looking at ML ops pipelines in general for production. So I think there's a lot of different kinds of resources out there for kind of short trainings that could give you an idea of what each stage of the pipeline looks like and what kind of available tooling is out there to support them. Emily, did you have anything to add?
No, I think that basically covered it.
Okay.
Great, thank you for that.
Okay, great. Okay, any other findings, Emily, related to the poll before I move on?
It got a little bit more even while you're answering that question. So interesting. Yeah, awesome.
Okay, but yeah, hopefully this presentation provides a little bit of a primer to what kinds of topics fall under this ML ops umbrella, and then hopefully additionally the rubric could help tackle some of these pieces. They're definitely things we've seen in working with various organizations, so they're very common barriers. Okay, so now I was going to share some lessons that we've learned as we've gone through the process of evaluating MLOps tools. For context, the way that the rubric was built was we kind of brought together a lot of experts on our team in MLOps pipelines, and then also in just developing machine learning models for their respective research projects. So we started with a ton of knowledge, and then we kind of iterated on this rubric by testing it out ourselves in kind of some mock use cases, and then actually applying the rubric to our real projects to help teams really pick out tools. So throughout all of that, we've definitely learned a lot of different things that are, I think, relevant to MLOps tool evaluation, but also just kind of important for using the rubric specifically. So first, one piece that I think is super important is to try to document the tool integrations that go into each tool. So to kind of clarify, a lot of tools will claim that they have coverage of a variety of different capabilities, and this may be the case, but oftentimes they're actually using integrations to kind of provide that huge scope. So for example, when you're training models, you will often use PyTorch or TensorFlow. So it's good to know like which of those machine learning frameworks are actually being supported by the tool and the tool is relying on to enable machine learning training and evaluation. So this is an important piece to keep in mind, is just setting up a strategy for kind of tracking those dependencies, and then at times thinking about ways you might pick up the dependencies and do an evaluation on them as well. So that's one piece that definitely came up. A second is that it's really important to customize the rubric to whatever specific questions you may have. It could be that you're focusing on specific capabilities that matter to you. It's a good idea to add or remove questions as needed, and also add those sub questions about any specific areas that you want to ask questions about. And then finally, I think thinking about the scope of your evaluation is really important. There are a lot of different kinds of tools you could look at. And so you're going to want to look at the specific sections, for example, within tool capabilities that are relevant to your project. And then also kind of related to the integrations topic, there are scenarios where maybe the tool is relying on a kind of lesser known tool to handle some functionality. And so you may need to do an in-depth evaluation of that kind of like sub tool / integration as well, especially when you're thinking about security. if you have a really secure system, but then you have an integration that is not so secure, that could really be an issue. So those are pieces to think about. So then we have another poll question, and then I know I'll kind of explain this briefly, and then I think we have a question from the audience that we'll take, a live question. But so to give an overview of this, this question is focused on kind of where your team currently is. These were 4 kinds of scenarios that we've seen, but everyone's current situation might be completely different. So feel free to answer other as well, or leave more info in the chat. But 4 kind of like archetypes of challenge. So the first is scaling up. So let's say we're growing our team, our data, our number of ML projects. And so we're starting to need better tooling to actually support that growth. This is kind of a common situation, especially as teams are starting to have a wider variety of projects that they're working on. A second option is evaluating open source. So I've seen a lot of people be really interested in open source tools, especially if they're free or they have an active community, but they're not really sure how to assess them effectively to make sure, for example, these tools will be supported in the long run, or that they're usable for government projects. A third option is from proof of concept to production. So this is another common one where you started out with maybe some really strong models that were trained on some data that you have. But when it comes to actually deploying and monitoring those systems, as data changes over time, you might need tools to actually help you make that leap. And then finally, for teams that are looking to adopt a new MLOps tool, there can be some concerns about ecosystem uncertainty. So here, maybe you're not sure what the full software ecosystem actually looks like, or how tools will integrate within that. So it's important to kind of get a sense of, as you acquire tools, how that will impact the entire pipeline. So that can be another challenge as teams try to kind of build out MLOps pipelines. I guess I can answer a live question, and then I'll see what Emily is seeing on the poll.
Yeah, great. Violet, Roy had asked for a classifier application. How much data do you need, and how do you know that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think there are elements of that are active research projects that people are working on, thinking about how much data is enough data, how do you make sure you have high quality data, how might you generate things like synthetic data to augment available data. I would say it seems, from my experience, to be quite project specific and application specific. For large language models, for example, they rely on tons and tons of data typically to kind of learn how language works and how to generate language. But I've also seen emerging work that's suggesting that maybe you don't actually need as much data as previously thought before to build productive LLMs. For classifiers, again, it could have there could be a lot of different factors related to the data and what kinds of relationships you're actually trying to capture with the model. I think this is a place where effective EDA tools and also process around experimentation can help you figure out how to strike the right balance. Emily, did you have anything to add / anything that you're seeing on the poll?
Nothing to add. That was a really great answer. But I think it looks like scaling up is definitely the winner on this poll, at least. And there's some equal distribution amongst the other options as well. But definitely looks like the majority of people said they have problems with scaling up and need better tooling to support scaling.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, that is something that we've seen a lot. I think throughout the rubric, we focus on trying to document how collaborative the tool is and thinking about if the tool enables for easy sharing of information and import and export. So that's an important thing to keep in mind as, for example, a team is scaling up. So really good to know. Okay, so now I have some different example scenarios I was going to walk through based on each of those topics. And then I want to make sure we have ample time for any audience questions at the end. So to start, I'll just kind of walk through each of the scenarios, our recommendation based on our experiences, and then how you might use the rubric to support this analysis. So let's say you're a small team and you're currently using, for example, just personal Jupyter notebooks to do your EDA work. And this has been going well so far, but it's starting to become challenging because your team's getting bigger and all of a sudden you're having a lot more data that you're working with. A recommendation here would be to consider integrating tools to help with data management and exploration, especially as your project scales up and maybe you're working with different data sets or data types. And so in the rubric, this really correlates to the data operations section and probably specifically this 1.1 exploring data area. So this is looking at kind of baseline types of functionality you would expect to see from an EDA tool, like ability to generate tables and visualizations, the ability to capture different metrics that may be of interest. And then also there's some pieces here that have to do with actually being able to record and share your work, if there's any automation in place to actually help you with scaling that EDA work, and then ability to search and filter through data, which can be really important, especially as the volume of data you're working with grows. Second scenario is all about that open source piece. So as an example, let's say you're a Department of Energy FFRDC research group, and you're thinking of using an open source tool that was developed by a startup that you think seems really cool, it's free, could help you with model training. Our recommendation here would be to first evaluate a variety of different factors related to the credibility and the operational readiness to figure out if this tool is actually fit for use. So there are a couple different sections that talk about this in our acquisition and deployment piece, specifically the credibility and operational readiness section. There are a lot of good questions here that could be a starting point. The questions are not necessarily mutually exclusive, so you'll probably want to go through and figure out which of these are actually relevant to our project. So for example, you might want to change this piece to talk about the Department of Energy specifically. If there's a precedent for some other group within your organization using tools, that could be a good indicator that the tool has achieved some level of credibility and operational readiness, has made it through different security considerations. But then you might want to remove a couple of these. Like, for example, maybe you're not concerned about on-premise installation, or you're not going to use a cloud service offering. You can kind of tailor this to whatever specific plan you have for using the tool. A third example, or scenario, let's say you have a team and you're really experienced at developing proof of concept for different models, but you don't really have robust monitoring methods in place. So maybe you even have an individual currently manually reviewing the inputs and outputs of your model each day and initiating retrainings as needed. So it's awesome to have someone be able to do this, but it can be a little challenging maybe as the number of inputs and outputs grows by a lot, or maybe that designated team member has some other piece they could focus on instead. So our recommendation would be to consider integrating tools that would help automate the monitoring of your deployed models and maybe even trigger retrainings. And ideally, you'll be able to set some criteria, some thresholds for performance, for example, that should trigger those retrainings. So this section, model deployment and monitoring, has a lot of topics related to this kind of scenario. So for example, you might want to look at, first of all, understand what data drift and model drift are, and then also think about what kinds of tools provide coverage for this. Other kinds of elements of model performance you might want to track, and use this kind of as a starting point for evaluating tools that could help you with that. Our fourth scenario is this piece about ecosystem uncertainty. So let's say you have a team with a well-established process for model training, and really they just need help with primarily with data and model versioning, for example, which is a common kind of scenario we've seen. There are a lot of end-to-end tools available, but it's not always clear how they actually integrate within your current stack. So our recommendation here would be to use the rubric as a starting point and start documenting whether the capabilities are provided through the tool directly or if they're integrations, and use this to kind of better understand the ecosystem of tools that you would be actually employing if you were to select and use this MLOps tool. So this is pulled from some work we've done. So as an example, we used color coding to indicate yellow has coverage of this tool or of this capability, but it's relying on some integrations to do it. Green it's really primarily doing this thing itself. And then red we're not really seeing a clear pathway or a straightforward way to integrate different tools to achieve this for this specific tool that we're reviewing. So for example, for data operations, this one in yellow, maybe the tool isn't really designed for data management, but it works with integration with a variety of tools that can provide coverage. This could kind of tip us off. Maybe we're using one of these already. Maybe we're using a competitor to one of these. Maybe for some reason we know we can't use one of them or we have to investigate that. So this would help us document that. And then below for this model operation scenario or within the scenario for model operations, let's say we have a tool that's actually designed for model versioning and management and it enables integration with PyTorch, but that's not like super central to how it works. This kind of view is really challenging to get for tools just scrolling through their websites, but it's something that you can learn more about as you use the rubric. So, and I guess a final piece before we move on, we have some time allotted just for Q&A. I would say in addition, basically using the rubric is a really important starting point for doing these evaluations. It can also be super helpful to talk with the teams that produce the tools, ask them to give a demo or something similar. And then third, it's also really useful to actually pick up the tools and try to use them yourself, especially if there's like a free version that you can do that with. So we've found as we've been trying to unpack kind of what these ecosystems look like, that some combination of all three has been the best way to figure out what the tool specifically can do and what integrations are necessary versus nice to have and so on. So, okay, we're open to any questions people would have. These are just some ideas about types of topics we could cover. But Shane, if you have any questions for us, either things people asked in advance or now, we're happy to answer them.
Yes, thank you very much. So I'm going to combine one that we got previously and one that Jeff asked in the chat now. Jeff had asked, how can we access your rubric? What platform was used to develop it? And then Mo had asked earlier, are the tools free? And why do we need tool evaluation? So can we lump those all together?
So our rubric, we just use Excel spreadsheets as an easy way to build this out, and within our organization, it's easy for us to share and edit Excel spreadsheets. So that was an easy way to do this. But as we showed with the prototype, we're also thinking about different kinds of interfaces we could build out that might be more interactive, and that the Excel version should be made available after our webcast sometime soon. And then Emily, I don't know, do you want to take the question about the free tools piece or?
Yeah, I would say, assuming this is referring to the ML ops tools, some of them are free, some of them are open source and available for use. Sometimes you have to deploy them yourself, like kind of deploy them as a web service. Some of them are paid, and like they also have usually have some kind of tier, like there's like a personal use free tier. It's like Docker, and like a personal use free tier, and then like for an organization there's like some licensing that you have to pay for. And you can kind of characterize what licenses are good for what use cases. Sometimes there's like an education tier as well. So they're kind of all structured. A lot of them are structured that way, I would say. And sorry, what was the second part of that question? I want to make sure.
Why do we need tool evaluation in general?
I think the main motivation for evaluating these sorts of tools is that there's a lot of options out there, and a lot of companies are like kind of getting into this space because it's pretty undertapped. So there's like a lot of different options available for people, and I think especially for like government projects or like specific use cases, I think it's useful to know which one will best serve your needs and kind of like separate out like the sales language, so to speak, from the actual like using of the tool and how it will best benefit your project. So Violet, do you want to add anything to that?
Just one final thing to add is the point you were making about how a lot of them have like a free version versus maybe an academic version versus an enterprise version. We did see that across a lot of tools. And so one of the things that we recommend people doing early in the evaluation is looking at the cost structure for the tool. And we have some questions to ask in our rubric that cover that topic as well.
Okay, Mark had typed into the chat, coming at this from a metadata management perspective, does a rubric address the tagging and labeling aspect, consistency, interoperability, etc.?
I think I can start. There's like a few references to, definitely a few references to metadata, tagging of data. There's like a question about whether the tools support labeling data, and then like versioning the data sets and whether or not you can like add your own metadata fields. I think these are all discrete things that we put in the rubric. There may be some other ones that I'm not remembering off the top of my head. But yeah, there's definitely we're trying to get at that aspect of it as well, because it kind of adds to data management and as well as usability. So
Okay, Balaji had sent in a question about evaluation metrics. What best practices exist for evaluating MLOps tools in terms of performance, automation, and reliability? In regarding to adoption and challenges, what common obstacles do teams face when implementing MLOps solutions, and how can they be overcome?
I can start off at least with the first half of that question about kind of how people go about evaluating MLOps tools. I will say, so as we worked on this rubric, I hadn't seen anything really like the rubric. So I think this is kind of it's an evolving area with emerging methods for how you actually evaluate tools, and our rubric is one of those. One thing that I have seen, I have to check what the link was to it, but I have seen a couple websites where they're trying to provide sort of an overview of what tools are out there with different columns that talk about the content areas that those tools address, which is also a really helpful starting place, I would say, for evaluating and figuring out what tool might be useful. But it doesn't really get into the specifics of what capabilities, or from what I've seen, I haven't seen one that got into the specifics of what capabilities were offered, or that has started to address questions about like cost, user experience, and these other support capabilities that I feel really help you differentiate between tools and are a good indicator of quality and how well they'll work for your team. And then one other piece, in addition to kind of evaluating tools for like what capabilities they offer, you could also approach this from more of a T&E perspective and try to test out actually building pipelines and track different performance metrics for how quickly it can catch different kinds of things, or how much data it can process in a certain amount of time, and so on. One of our colleagues, Dan DiCapria, has done a lot of work in that area, thinking about, from a T&E perspective, how you go about evaluating different MLOps tools. So definitely, if people have questions about that, his work is something to take a look at, or to help you get in touch with him on that.
Great. One from Cheryl asking, given the rapidly changing landscape of entrance into the AI space and businesses who are in varying stages of maturity that offer MLOps tools, can you address criteria for identifying which company tools one might want to consider evaluating?
I guess like basically this would be like the pre-evaluation before the evaluation, kind of, I would imagine, because it does take a lot of effort, I would say, to fill out the rubric, and it's like kind of a deep dive into characterizing the system. But I think we got a pretty good idea just from like kind of looking at the demos that all these companies have available and like reading the initial documentation and kind of skimming for like what they emphasize, I think in their like on their websites and in their documentation and their marketing language, as like, I think you can kind of start with that as a baseline, and then the rubric helps you uncover like what you need, or like how it will specifically help you in your use case. So I think that's like kind of, it gets that deeper level of understanding of the tool's capabilities, and then kind of helps to do a first pass though.
Yeah, one other thing just to add about, like, when thinking about tools that are maybe newer tools or from startups, and if you should include them in your search or not, we found that a lot of tools have active online communities, whether it's on GitHub or if they have a community forum or some other kind of area where people are talking about using the tool. And those can kind of give you a sense of how active the community is, maybe how many people are using the tool. So that can be another kind of like gut check early on to figure out if you want to include something in scope for your evaluation.
Great. I think we can squeeze in two more here. Valissa had asked, is the rubric easily accessible for use by government ministries? And does the use of these tools ensure data privacy, especially within states that have strict data privacy laws?
I would say that the rubric itself is usable, and we'll try to make it available after this. The tools, I think that's part of the evaluation process, is figuring out whether or not like it actually does follow data privacy regulations. And we do have that like specific. I think there's a couple of specific questions in the rubric that are like, does this follow applicable like data privacy laws, or like kind of insert your own whatever applies to your use case there. But yeah, that's definitely something to strongly consider, I think, when you're actually doing analysis, because some of them have like cloud offerings, or they're managing your data in the cloud. Some of them have like on-premise deployments, and that's also like whether or not it's cloud or on-premise is also included in the rubric. So it's like considering those kinds of things, I think, can help you understand like what if these tools are actually following, like, will these be compliant with the regulations that your project requires?
Great. Last one, we'll wrap up. Usu had typed in your experience, are there MLOps tools for a fully on-premise deployment? And do you have any constraints handling large amounts of data with the tools you tested? So first part, in your experience, are there MLOps tools for a fully on-premise deployment? Second question, do you have any constraints handling large amounts of data with the tools you tested?
I will say, so we were looking more at, as Emily said, looking at capabilities that they are offering and trying out on smaller sample use cases, looking at demos. So I can't really speak to how well they work with large amounts of data, although I will say a lot of them have customers that are huge organizations that do have a ton of data. So that might be an indicator that a lot of them actually are built for scale. And as we've been working with customers to help them build out MLOps pipelines, I haven't heard any complaints about that. So I do think a lot of companies building MLOps tools are thinking about how do they actually deal with data, like really large amounts of data. And then as far as on-premise installation goes, this has also been a topic that's come up with some customers. A lot of the kind of like more well-established companies we've looked at have options for on-premise installation, but there are different cost structures and particulars to how they handle this. So I think there are definitely a lot of considerations related to both cost and security that teams will have to think about, or they may have to reach out to the vendor specifically and figure out like what would this actually look like if you were to install this on-premise.
Violet and Emily, great discussion today. Thank you very much for sharing your expertise. We know you did mention the rubric will be made available on the SEI website within the next couple of days. We'll make sure we email that out to all the registrants for today's webcast. Lastly, we'd like to thank you all for attending today. Upon exiting, please hit the like button below the video window and share the archive if you found value today. Also, you can subscribe to the SEI's YouTube channel by clicking on the SEI seal in the lower right corner of the video window. Any questions from today's event, please send to info@sei.cmu.edu. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.